Hello, welcome to this edition of the Pan-African Debate. It's on your Pan-African channel. This is Afrique Media. It's always a pleasure welcoming you for us to discuss some of the issues and events affecting the African continent. It's always a great pleasure to know that you're watching us, and we invite you to stay with us today as we're discussing Africa. We're discussing the between neo-colonial shadows and joining geopolitical alliance. We're discussing today Africa faces a crucial geopolitical juncture with new global powers like China, Russia, Turkey, and Gulf states intensely engaging the continent. But do these partnerships genuinely advance Africa's development and sovereignty, or are they just neo-colonialism in disguise? That's a big question. These players bring investment, however, infrastructure and security aid. China's Belt and Road builds roads and ports. Russia on its part offers military support tied to resource access, while Turkey and Gulf states boast trade and political ties. Africa's hosting of the 2025 G20 summit emphasizes its growing global role and demands fair trade as well as financial support and climate collaboration. Yet historical colonial exploitation warns of risks. African countries often surrender control over resources or accumulated heavy debt, benefiting outsiders. Russia's security for resources trade sparks fear of new dependencies. However, equally, local economies gain sometimes remain minimal, challenging sustainability. As a global balance of power shifts, Africa has a historic opportunity to redefine engagement rules and shape a multipolar order honoring its interests. The challenge lies in remaining vigilant against neo-colonial pitfalls while embracing partnerships and advance sustainable transformation. Stay with us. We're discussing today Africa and new global partnerships here on the Pan-African Debate. Hello once again, thanks for joining us on this edition of the Pan-African Debate. Thanks for always tuning in. Today on the program we're discussing Africa and new global partnerships. We're asking a big question: are these geopolitical partnerships, are they genuine or neo-colonialism in disguise? That's a big question today we'll be discussing on today's program, the Pan-African Debate. To remind you that we will be interested to get your contributions. If you're watching us by Facebook or back at home, be rest assured you can send us your contributions. Leave them on our Facebook live page. We'll read them here during the program. And why not, we shall equally give you time for you to call in and share with us your opinions. Tell us, what do you think about Africa and global partnerships? Are these genuine partnerships within the geopolitical context, or are this just this neo-colonialism in disguise? That's what we'll be discussing today. We definitely going to welcome guests, those who will be discussing these issues, this topic with us. We have on the Zoom this day, joining us from the USA, we have Madam Marilyn Dua. You are the host of the Zoom In Show on AfroSat TV. Madam Marilyn Dua, it's a pleasure having you on today's program. Welcome to join us.
Hello, Louise. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be on the show. I want to say hi to all my co-panelists, those in the studio and those on Zoom. I want to say hi to all Cameroonians, in particular, in all Cameroonians. The role of new global players in reshaping African geopolitics, new form of neocolonialism or genuine geopolitical partnership. Please, I want to say that the Bible tells us that there's nothing new under the earth. So are these really new partners, or is it old partners repackaged? So I'm looking forward to an exciting debate today. Thank you.
Exactly. Whether all partners repackage, that's of course what we'll be discussing as well. during this program. Madam Marilyn, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for accepting to be part of the program. We have Mr. Fayevis, who is a journalist and political analyst. Mr. Fayevis, you joining us equally on Zoom this day. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Fayevis. Welcome to the program.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure making present here today. And I think that everything being equal, one must have been able to take a look at, it's quite an interesting topic that I must admit, for the simple reason that there are a lot of political gimmicks that take place in the international scene. And these gimmicks tend to give us a semblance as if they are coming for assistance, as if they are coming for real business, which is supposed to be win-win. But unfortunately, it's not win-win. When you go into it, you realize that there are things that take place backstage before, during, and even after some of these partnerships that actually sends you thinking as to how did we go about to get to this level. Greetings to the people of Gunoko village, the people of Bengui, Meta, so to say, and greetings to all other media persons, especially political analysts around the country who are genuine political analysts and not partisan political analysts. Thanks. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fayevis, and equally warm regards to you. We're hoping to be joined by the other panelists, but definitely we're going to start discussions with you, Madam Marilyn. We're looking at Africa, just like you highlighted in your opening. Are these new partners, or are these new partners or old partners who have been repackaged? We have China, we have Russia, we have countries, of course, other countries, Turkey as well. We have them making their way in the continent, and let me begin with just what you highlighted. Are these old partners, or are these new partners actually, or old partners who have been repackaged? Let's begin from there, Madam Marilyn.
Luis, I want to say that when you look at where the world is going to, you look at the global leaders. You want to look at America, you want to look at China. If you look at all how the economies are moving, because you always want to follow the money. You always want to follow the money. If you look at how the economies are, you have the United States. It has, its debt is in the trillions. You have United States going toe to toe with China, and they're looking at the economy, how they want to shape the economy. You look at they're talking about the vehicle. They're talking about for energy. They're moving to solar. They're moving to even the cars. They're going to energy cars. Where is the energy? The energy is in Africa. We have most of those resources. So again, it's the same. It's the same partners that we have. We're happy to see other countries like Russia coming forcefully into Africa. That gives us an opportunity to bargain, because somebody says that you keep doing the same thing over and over and you expect different outcome. So we've had our, colonial partners, France, Europe. It's good to see other players coming in. Competition is always good. Opportunity to be able to negotiate from a position of strength. Right after independence, they negotiated their contracts from a position of weakness. I believe that with these new players coming in, Russia, Turkey, we have an opportunity to be partners and negotiate some of these contracts from a position of strength. Again, I'm calling on Cameroonians, and I was very happy to see the past week. I saw how Cameroon was able to buy back some of its companies, and I hope the players on the ground are seeing. You have NEO, for example, that was more than 50% owned by foreign investors. Yet, look at the poor performance of NEO. Those Cameroonians who think that they keep calling on the West to come and save us. They keep calling on the West, but look at NEO, a company that was over 51% owned by foreign investors. Look at the poor performance. So I don't want to discount Cameroonians, Luis, as a partner. I want to see Cameroonians taking more ownership of their investments of their future, taking their future into their hands, leading some of these companies. You need to know that sky's the future. We have most of the world's resources. We have the resources. We are the future. And we are constantly being studied. I guarantee you have PhD students in the West. You have think tanks in the West constantly studying Africa to figure out, how to come in. And we know the playbooks, there's nothing new under the sun. We know the playbooks that is being used is competition as they come in, costing, we know what it is. They want raw materials and they want it at a very low price, preferably for free. How do you get free raw materials? You make sure that you come up with false theories. You come up with false theories, and then people use it to kill themselves. Boko Haram, what are the other false theories out there? You have the ISIS, those false theology that people use, religion, so that the people can kill themselves, and then while they're fighting in conflict, then these people, nefarious people, are coming behind and getting all our raw materials for free, not paying a price that is competitive on the world market. You have a price that is, they're not paying competitive prices on the world market. So it's to African intellectuals to be, to educate the people to know. And I want to talk about peace. The role of peace is very, very important, because there can be no progress without peace. You see, the government of Cameroon has taken the initiative to buy back its companies. I want to call on them that this is a singular opportunity to run these companies well. We look at the other companies in Cameroon. You want to look at CDC. You want to look at PAMO. Some of these other companies that are poorly run, poorly managed. You have those kind of companies, and there's unemployment. These companies don't even invest in the communities, the corporate responsibility. So I'm so optimistic. Government needs to use this as an opportunity to use these companies that they have now to run them according to our African philosophy, employ the youth, and have the corporate social responsibility in terms of education, in terms of healthcare. And then the population also, it takes two to tango. It takes two to tango. As the government is doing its own part, the population needs to know that there can be no progress without peace. We need peace and stability. You need to build roads, to build hospitals, you need peace and stability. So if these people who are coming to cause chaos, to cause dissidents, the community needs to stand up to these people, because we cannot have peace and progress. We can't have progress and development without peace. So again, Luis, I want to say that we have an opportunity here. I'm happy to see other people like Russia, Turkey coming in. Competition is always good. We have tried France, America, Britain for a long time. It's now time for us to have new partnerships and renegotiate some of these terms of contracts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn Dua. We've had other partners. It's time to try new partners. And most importantly, you highlighted the fact that Cameroon buys back NEO, and one of the issues is that Africa has got all of these natural resources, but then the continent still remains very poor. Mr. Five, is when you look at all of the natural resources that the continent has, but yet still remains very poor, do you think this aspect is tied to the colonial past, or is rooted in colonial past, or what do you think? Most times we blame the aspect of leadership, but do you think it has anything to do with the colonial past of the African continent? Because colonial past is actually a common issue of most of the African countries.
Yes, I think that the colonial past has a role to play, a very big role to play. Because when the West were coming to colonize Africa, first, they came through missionaries. And the missionaries were holding the Bible in one hand and the gun on the other hand. That was to actually take a look at it. If you hear about the Industrial Revolution, you realize that in one of the outbreak or the factors of the Industrial Revolution and the effect of it had to do with looking for a market for the finished or the semi-finished products that were quite produced in the West and in America. Let's say West, that's Europe, America. Now, Africa was a good breeding ground for that market, which also served as a breeding ground for the labor. Now, when the issues of slave trade was rounding up, you now realize that the colonialism that came in now had to do with taking a look on how they could get the people governed. Now, governing the people in Africa had to do with controlling their resources. Of course, those that came in the form of the Baptist missionaries, Catholic missionaries, non-governmental organizations that are even more rampant now than before, there is an information that they trigger sensitive information in their reports and send back to the bigger organizations that fund them. And these organizations take these informations and work it out in their think tank process, which is now sent to the United Nations. Now, I will tell you that the UN and the Security Council in particular is what we call the think tank of the world. Now, the neo-colonialism passes through the Security Council, what we call permanent members of the Security Council. And I will tell you that in that particular think tank, they have an overall view of their needs. What are the needs of the countries in the West? If you look at the distribution of natural resources by nature across the globe, you would realize that the distribution is in a way that some of the resources are found in some geographic locations and they are not found in other geographic locations by nature. And what does it mean? It simply means that there will be a cohesion where what I have and what you don't have, we can come together in a common understanding and we see how we can carry on with some exchanges. But now, if these exchanges take the form of international trade, it will equally take the form of what we call the balance of trade. In the balance of trade, it will take the dimension of 50-50. But unfortunately, it's not what happens. So what they do in the caucus that surrounds the permanent members of the Security Council is to see how they can formulate policies that can work for the interest of the West at the detriment of the developing countries. And that's why people will tell you, ironically, that we have the largest site of bauxite, gold, and other natural resources in Africa, but Africa is still the poorest as compared to the West. So how come about it? It is very, very ironical. And what happens? The policies that these guys formulate from the United Nations and through the permanent members of the Security Council triggers down to give an interest to all the West at the detriment of the developing countries, or what they call African countries. Now, how do you look at it? Many people ask the questions, how is it very possible that we have independence? Then after independence, in the early 60s, most of the African countries were now allowed to control or to have power. But then when you look at the power that was given to them in terms of independence, it was smooth screen. It boils back to what we call neo-colonialism. For example, in French-speaking African countries, where we had the policy of assimilation, it became very clear that there were some accords that were signed between the African-speaking countries, that's the French-speaking African countries, and their former colonial masters, who are still colonial masters as we speak right now today. And some of these accords had to do with depositing some of their reserves to the French bank, that's the French central bank, which acted as a guarantee. Now, ipso facto, you now realize that this guarantee was simply for the French to have an eye on the economy of the former colonies, which are still our present colonies, so to say. So at the end of it, you have some programs like C2G that comes in. We have other small programs that are attached with the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Youth Affairs, with the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Livestock, and all the like. All these programs that come in the form of aid do not come because the West just feel like to give us some aid. Of course, in politics and in the international scene of it, we understand that there is no permanent friend. What is constant in international politics and international relation is permanent interest. The moment the interest is jeopardized, of course, the accords start shaking from their foundations. So if you look at all what transpires within the African continent, you now realize that as per today, the neo-colonialism continues with the partnership that is even worse, more than what we even had when we hadn't even independence, because it's still ironical. Now, I tell you, for example, how do you explain that to go to the US, you have documents to compile, which goes right to the embassy, and you'll be spending, first, there's an amount of money, not less than 350,000 francs, that you sent into a bank. Now, other documents are supported. So by the time you want to get a document to process them to get to the American embassy, you are already spending the tune of 400,000 francs CFA. Now, if you take 400,000 francs times over 300, let me talk about Cameroon. You take 400,000 francs times at least 200 persons who queue up at the American embassy on daily basis. You can imagine how much is gotten from Cameroon that goes into the US Treasury. Now, look at Ghana, look at Ethiopia, look at South Africa, look at Egypt, look at Mali and other countries. You now realize that the fact that they don't have visa free to go to their countries is already another form of draining us and getting the money from us in their billions annually. So at the end, you still see that form of draining the economy. Of course, Tanzania and a host of few other countries, including Ghana, were already contemplating that the Americans, to get to these countries too, they too need to pay for their visas. Now, if you look at it, you realize that the fact that these countries, West, use some of these methods, it goes down in a way that they are draining us. Now, how do you explain that for the forests in West Equatorial Africa, almost all those that are exploiting the forest reserves are foreigners? It means that you have the Spanish, you have the Italian, you have the British, you have the French in particular, then you have the American companies, conglomerates, who come together and they are getting our resources. The forest is they're getting the wood from the forest every day. And only for them to get it into finished products, and when they sell it, the cost, or rather the value of what they have transformed is 5 times the value of the raw material. And why do you think that with all the partnerships we have with the West, they will not want to encourage us to put in place semi or finished industries in Africa that could enable us get the raw material, say gold, bauxite, silver, timber, only to our own countries, transform before we sell them out? They will not do that. That's the jigsaw puzzle games many Africans don't understand, that they will not want to do that. And how do they put these policies into place? They influence the leaders. Each time there is politics, they know that they pass through, they pump those who have to protect their interests, they give them more money to come into the political arena. So when they sponsor you politically on the agreement that you protect their interests, the moment you gain power, you are bound to do that. Now, if you take power and you want to become so wise, they will simply do what they did to Laurent Gbagbo in Cote d'Ivoire, where at a point in time, Laurent Gbagbo was not willing to dance to the French systems. As such, they had to pass through Alassane Ouattara, and there was a coup d'etat that unseated. And that coup d'etat was aided by French troops who moved right to Abidjan and right up to the presidential palace and ousted Laurent Gbagbo. So all these things are carefully planned. It's either you are with us for the West, or you are either against us. That's their policy. And so when you look at all the jigsaw puzzle games that go in and out of it, you now realize that it is a carefully planned mechanism. That's why if you go to Burkina Faso, what did they do? The first thing they did was to suspend non-governmental organizations in their country. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré took over, why were they suspending? Because they came to realize that these non-governmental organizations that have their funding, command and a chain of information flow that goes right down suddenly to affect and to give them what they want. So these things are very clear. So I think we have to be very honest and be very smart that where we are, all is not well. And that is why they will tell you that you have Japanese schools built in Cameroon. They tell you it's a gift from the Japanese government. There are Chinese schools built in Cameroon. They will tell you it's a gift from the Chinese government. American schools built and offered to the community for free. And they tell you these are gifts. Likewise, French schools. But are they gifts as per se? No. Because in politics, there's no free gift. What they give to you in this hand, they make sure they have some other accords that will enable them. Now, when the West tells you they are canceling debts to some countries, developing countries in Africa, do you think they're canceling because they don't know where they're getting the money back? No. If I cancel that debt, I get you another agreement that because you cannot pay this debt, allow me extract your wood or the forest for about 30, 50 to 100 years. Then it can be equal to the debt you are owing me. You easily agree as a gullible leader who are not even patriotic to Africans because they work for the interest of the West. And that's why the issue gets much more complicated, because almost, I said, 3/4 of the leaders, African leaders, work for the interests of the West. That's why most of their investments are not in Africa. They plow back their investments as African leaders back in the Western countries. And so at the end, the money gets back there, and Africa remains poorer and poorer day in, day out. It is a sad situation.
It is a sad situation. It's a sad situation, like you said, Mr. Fives. Thank you. We got you very clearly. Now, let's talk to you, Madam Marilyn Ndua. Now, if the causes or the problems, the poverty in the African continent is rooted in the colonial legacies, and we have new partners who are coming in, our big question is, do you think these new partners will change anything that's going to advance the country's, the continent's development, or are this neo-colonialism in disguise? When we consider that we are where we are in Africa because of the colonial past, which we are still facing the impact right now or up to this moment, these new partners, do you think anything will change, or they are just neo-colonialism in disguise, Madam Marilyn?
So, Luis, I'm an optimist, like I told you. I'm an optimist. So I do believe that we have an opportunity in these new dynamics that's presenting itself with the new players. I want to urge the new players to learn from the old players. Like, I take France, for example. I'm saying that in the future, France is going to be studied on, and the topic is going to be how to misuse funds, because France had these 14 colonial countries that paid, had all the currency. They were basically our central, they prevented us from having a central bank. They had all our natural resources for basically free. And as soon as a few African countries, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, cut the cord, France is in economic crisis. That is how you see how the Western countries, how they misused the funds, and they did not come up with a policy like England. France was unable to think about how to make its economy not to be dependent on Africa. So these new players coming in should learn from this and should come into this partnership with a genuine win-win mentality. But again, it takes two to tango. The African, once you come to negotiate, when you come to the negotiating table, you come from a position of strength. That's why it's important that we support our leaders. Like I keep saying, when elections are over, we are now all on the same team. It's important that we support our leaders so that when they go to negotiate these contracts, they come from a position of strength with the support of their people. Because what are some of the techniques that these people use? They use fractioning. They show our leaders that, look, the people are not behind you. They threaten them that, we can cause chaos in your country, and force our leaders to negotiate from a position of weakness because they want to maintain and strength. We've seen it. We've seen it throughout the years. If you look, from the studies that we read, literature has it that some of our leaders were shortlisted for to be taken to International Court of Justice. And whatever negotiations happened, they fell off the list. Some of our leaders were on the list were shortlisted for Nobel Peace Prize. And these are carrots and sticks and carrots that is in the world of in the geopolitics that they use on our leaders. So it's very important. You see, some of us, we support our leaders because of all these geopolitical games that are going on, that we want to support out there. We support our leaders, and then when we come home, we sort our issues. Again, when the elections are over, it's very important that we present a united front when they're doing some of these negotiations. Again, the new players should learn from the old players. They have an opportunity, because France had a unique opportunity because of our colonial history. If France had not treated the 14 African nations as slaves, as les colons, we would have had a good partnership with France, where we have a win-win situation, benefiting from each other. But France was never interested in infrastructure, in building infrastructure. You have some of the German infrastructure that were built and still standing. But you have the French infrastructure in Cameroon. After our shared history, you don't have much to show for it. They did not have a genuine interest. Their politics was to leave us as underdeveloped and to leave us as a colon. Why they take all our resources and live a good life? France would have been in a situation where they would have been our best partners. But now Africa has thrown out France. Why? Because you can only use people for so long. So, Luis, back to your question. We have a unique opportunity with these new leaders. And I think that the new leaders are not stupid. If I'm speaking to them, to Russia, to Turkey, to the Gulf states, if you're coming to Africa as to negotiate as a partner, an equal partner, you have a good opportunity, because Africa, we have unlimited resources. It needs to be a win-win situation where you don't intend to use us, but you come in as partners to develop Africa, and you have this continued win-win situation. So it's very important also for the African leaders to go into this with transparency, to negotiate these terms with transparency, and to leverage collectively. Because if you come, for example, you have Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, the one of the top cocoa producers. They need to come together on the world market and determine the terms of negotiation together. So they go in as one block to negotiate their prices. And this is where African Union, which a lot of people say is a backing dog. This is some of where they can play, come and be very important in some of these negotiations. Africa needs to go in together as a block to negotiate some of these prices. Cameroon and Congo, when they're going to the world market, the Western economy, the future is energy. They're going to energy cars. All that energy is in Africa. We have what they need for their energy cars, for their mobile phones, for their tablets. We need to go in as one block to negotiate together, because that's what one of the advantages why Africa was partitioned into little bits. Because what can a little country be in front of European Union negotiate together? Why can't Africa come together and negotiate together? So, Luis, to your point, I'm an optimist, and I know that our leaders, after 50 years, I know that they have looked, they have corrected. This is one of the advantages why we have someone like our President Pobia, who has been there, who is an institution for himself. We know that he's a very smart person. We know that he's a Pan-African. I'm not saying that because of recent things that are happening, but from when he was a student in Europe, we know what he did. We know that he's very smart, and this is some of the advantages that we are going to benefit. We're going to benefit from him, from this strategic decision, this negotiations. He needs to, after almost 50 years, he needs to sit and see where the errors are, and go into these negotiations and negotiate long-term for us, where Africans and Cameroonians, we can benefit from some of these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we equally have joining us, we have Dr. Eric Eddy. You're the Executive Secretary of Committee of Action for Cote d'Ivoire. Dr. Eric Eddy, welcome to the program. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. And I wonder if you can hear me as well.
Sure, Doctor, we can hear you. We're discussing Africa and global partnership, and the question we're asking, are these partnerships a mere disguise or another form of neo-colonialism? Can these partnerships actually, are they genuine? And the question we're asking is, these partnerships, for a very long time, most of them have been existing, and we have lots of investments equally coming into the continent, but then the continent still remains poor. Why is it that these partnerships and this continuous funding or continuous investment from the West and outside Africa is not sufficient to change the development or to reduce poverty on the continent, in addition to the massive resources that the continent has?
I believe that the explanation bears. Before I even go into answering your question, let me start by apologizing to my co-panelists and the viewers and listeners of this important show. I mistakenly mistook, the time of the show, thinking that it will start at the 10 a.m. My time here on this side of the world, compared to 9 o'clock. Forgetting that we have lost 1 hour. So I sincerely want to apologize for that. In terms of the question that you asked, what to answer, I believe that my submission will be layered or presented as this. There is a complexity, right, of factors that can actually help us, understand. Earlier, when I joined the show, I heard a question, related to the impact of the colonial past in the current, situation, economic, political, that, where we are living. I do agree with my brother Elvis, who spoke earlier on that. And the answers that he provided, I just wanted to reinforce some of the elements in here. When we go back to Walter Rodney, for instance, with this important book that you wrote, years ago, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. We can even go way back to the period of the shameful slavery. The mistake that, we should not be making, which of course, Western scholarship and the anti-African school of thoughts, scholars, will put in, is what we have heard of the former presidents for France, Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande saying, when they visited Africa, once in Senegal, the other one in Burkina Faso, saying that, we should not continue to cry. We should not continue to blame colonialism for the current state in which, Africa is when it comes to its economy, when it comes to this situation of undevelopment. The other thing is to consider what I call, what the vestiges, of colonialism, and which allows me to answer the question: what are the economic systems or structures that were left in place, and to what extent, Africa since the 1960s, at least, if not before that, for some of the countries like Egypt that gained their independence before that year, what are the vestiges that have been left in place, and to what extent those vestiges have been transformed. Number one, when you look at the economic system, Elvis, brother Elvis, did mention that, the currency for some of the African countries, for instance, that continue to be actually tied to the former colonial power. These are elements because colonization came with a system. Colonization came with an economic apparatus. Colonization came with a military apparatus as well. So in addition to the currency, let us not forget that, by 1960, so many different, were accords, right? Agreements of development or cooperation were put in place, including maintaining the French military presence or other countries, were military presence in there. When you look at, therefore, all of these apparatus, you wanted to know to what extent the African countries have been able to reshuffle the systems that they, quote unquote, inherited from the period of colonization. One example I want to give very quickly. When the regional economic communities were created, by here I want to talk about the SADC, for instance. I want to talk about the Economic Community of West African States. I want to talk the East African, communities. All of those were put in place with the intent of what? Modifying the trade relations or the trade patterns, for instance, making sure that, African countries, will deal among themselves more than they will deal with other countries. Our sister Ndua said earlier that, you have countries such as Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana, who are the top, cocoa producers, right? But to what extent the cooperation between these three countries when it comes to cocoa has been so effective to change the course of the prices of these raw materials, in the international market? That's a big interrogation mark in there. And then we have our political systems as well. all of the constitutions that, what we wrote, may it be in Nigeria, may it be, look at the political system that we have. In Nigeria, it is what? A 4-year term. We can clearly and easily determine where it comes from. We can see what is done, countries such as Liberia, how they are closely related to the United States. Today in Liberia, it is the US dollar that continues to be, that is used more as a currency than any other. So, my brother Louis, to land on that question, we want to answer the question that you raised to be redundant. We wanted to, again, revisit the vestiges, the inheritance that, we got from colonialism. And after 60 years of independence, we want to wonder and ask ourselves to what extent we as African countries have been successful in reinventing ourselves, in changing those patterns that we inherited in such a way that we can very definitely sever, modify the ties. To end on that question, when you talk about post-colonialism or neo-colonialism, I want to say this: whenever as African countries truly and effectively change their colonial relations with Europe. When? I think it is none. In my classes, when I was in the classroom, I always refer to 2 countries as the best examples of a post-colonial world, meaning countries that have effectively changed their relationship with the former colonial power. Number 1 is the United States. Let us not forget that, the US was a British colony. But today, what is happening? The United States not only changed even the English language that they inherited. Today we have the American English. Look at soccer, which is the quote-unquote British invention, and what is being the word of most celebrated sports competition. In the United States, we do not call football football, we call football soccer, and then the American football has taken stage. As you see Brazil and India and all that. And then when you take, China as another example of a post-colonial, we know that China was the soft belly of the world, at the time, especially of the Western world. But when the Chinese Revolution took place, of course, the commitment has been that China will never go back again to become or to stay or to become or remain that soft belly again that everybody can exploit. May it be the French at one time, may it be the powers from the Western world or even from Japan. And today, here's where China is. Since when the African countries have been able to put themselves on that path to completely modify and have this relationship that are, again, on the win-win, for me, it is not a matter of neo-colonialism. I believe that, our colonial relationship have actually continued. It is true that, we are yelling, we are, with our intelligence, of course, we're calling for new world order to be in there, which, of course, created this sense of a post-colonialism, but we still have a long way to go, which, again, explains what we have in there. The new powers that are coming in, Russia and China, have never been colonial power masters in Cote d'Ivoire, in Africa, I'm sorry. They have never been colonial masters, which created this optimism. If anything, Russia, at that time, or the Soviet Union, if you want, played a big role in the liberation of some countries. Remember the role that they played in Namibia. Remember the role that they played in South Africa. Remember the role that they played even in Cuba and many other African countries as well. And don't forget that at some point, those countries did have a good relationship with some African countries. May it be Benin, may it be Mali, that have some serious and good, relationship at the time. So I believe that there is hope in there, but colonialism has never ended in Africa. It has morphed into something different based on what I said earlier.
Thank you, Dr. Eric Eddy. Colonialism still remains in Africa. Mr. Five, the question I'll be asking you is, when you look at governance in Africa today, do you think it's been influenced by the colonial past? When you look at African governance this day, what's your take on how colonial past does it influence governance in Africa?
Yes. It does influence, as I said a while ago, that the chain of influence stems from the United Nations, then to the members of the Security Council. Africans need to ask this question. Why is it that why is it the whole continent, Africa as a continent, does not have members of the Security Council? That is the think tank. That is the think tank where drastic policies are taken that affects Africa and explains where we are today. So if you look at it very well, you realize that these questions come in, day out, as to why, and why. Now, the main thing is clear. Like I heard my sister Ondua spoke a while ago, we need to support the leaders, we need to come together as a bloc, or probably under African Union, But, I have some worries there. African Union is, first of all, dead. African Union is one of the institutions through which UN passes through to hold Africa in the grip where we find ourselves. And through the African Union, they pass through African Union to get to the regional bloc organizations, like the SADC, the ECOWAS, the BEAC areas, and the CEMAC, and all the like, to still carry on with that. So it is carefully planned. And because these systems are carefully put in place, you realize that among those who say you cannot support leaders, supporting the leaders is in two categories. Which leader are you supporting? If you have dictators, you support them. It's like if a blind leads a blind, all of them, they fall into a pit. Just like my sister Ondua said, President Paul Biya had been in Europe, they know what he has done. What is palpable that President Paul Biya has done? That's the question. Because the moment we continue to protect these dictators, and we give a semblance that these dictators are doing well for us, we got to destroy so many things. And that's the reason why, if you look at it critically, we need to call a spade a spade. What are these dictators doing? Have they been able to protect the interests of Africans? Have they been able to cut African from the colonial grip? If they have been able to do so, it's worth emulating that we support them for them to arrive at the endeavor of dissociating themselves from the colonial whims and caprices. But now, you look at it. I said earlier, the worst of it is in French African-speaking countries. That's where it is worst. Because most of the leaders, even before election, are already guaranteed their positions through the crooked means and institutions put in place by the dictators to guarantee their stay in power till death do them part. Now, you could write to France as a colonial master, you are not happy, this thing has happened. They will only tell you, no, we have sinned. How do you explain, as my sister was quoting, regional bloc passing through African Union, or we support government, that African Union will come to Africa, or African Union is in Africa rather, and then they come to observe elections in Africa. Elections that are rigged and mad. At the end, African Union writes a statement. The elections went on hitchfully, signing and certifying that the elections were okay. Do you think that constitution is worth itself? Absolutely nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. In the same way, when you look at it, what are the footprints of the leaders who have been able to take us out of, or who have been trying to take us out of the Western grip? Take the Sahel countries. These are young guys. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, these guys of the Mali is there, Niger is there, young guys. But these guys have taken within 1 year and 2 years to pay the debts, what hundreds of billions of francs CFA owed IMF and the World Bank. Do you now see that the problem of Africa are these hand-picked colonial leaders that are destroying African continent? That these Sahel countries have their own currency now. They are not attached to France. They have struggled to finish their debt, and they are now undergoing renovation. Now they have electric cars. This is Burkina Faso of yesterday, Mali of yesterday, that they are now building electric cars. Cameroon, for how many years, is not still able to get closer. I mean, 1/10 of that kind of mechanical auto engineering technology. And we sit here and we applaud that, for example, President Biya was in France, or maybe he was in Europe, we have his footprint. No. If these leaders have a footprint, is it normal that at 93 years, 92 years, someone can have the pedigree to reason, with the reasoning faculties in place, to lead millions of people in a challenging global world? All those who support those kind of African leaders, they themselves have a question mark. Because while we are clinging and crying for new leadership, let the wind of change blow. I have said I am one of the few Cameroonians who regret being a Cameroonian. Because each time I look at the Sahel, I envy. I say, oh, see, my God, how I wish I would have been this. When I look at the guys of Senegal, I say, how I wish I was part of Senegal. These are guys that have the similar history with other French-speaking African countries, and are cutting away. Let's go to Ghana. Ghana is making it possible. They are transforming raw materials, that is, they are putting in place semi and secondary industries in Ghana as I speak now, which means that Ghanaians are working on a policy because they have realized that they produce cocoa in tons, and yet the world price market is not determined by them. Now, Ghanaians now are putting a policy where they could start transforming the cocoa we have into semi and finished products, so that the value will come up. When they're selling in the world market, they will now determine the price and make the money. What is wrong? That we ourselves cannot support leaders who have this kind of visions. We want to support aging leaders who have expired. Yet, we are in Europe. We are not asking ourselves, if these kind of aging leaders, counterproductive, were in Europe, should we have dreamed of leaving African countries to go to Europe? Never. That Europe would have been hell. But today, most of us, Africans, who are in the West, will easily sit and blow grammar and say, no, everything is fine. We need to support these African leaders. How do you support a dictator who is counterproductive? The balance sheet and the records are there. Go to Togo. It is more of a hegemony. Nyasimbe is there, taking over from the father. When you go to Gabon, it's the same thing. When you go to some of these African countries that have a dynastic system of governance, and you think that we should support them, these are the kind of people that need to be unseated. On the contrary, so that we follow examples of the Sahel countries and we move on. South Africa is doing well. South Africa is more of a Western country while in Africa. Why? They took the bull by the horn, fought the apartheid, and then today they are enjoying. If we make sure that we put policies that can send off all the sleeping leaders, all these leaders who pay allegiance to the West, and they pretend as if they are not with the West, then we'll be fine. Look at our GDP. Cameroonians, an average Cameroonian fits on an average of 500 francs per day. We are in Europe. Can we live with that kind of money? No. We cannot feel fine in the West. And we come on an international media and we say, no, let us support these leaders. What has African Union done? African Union was supposed to be at the forefront of pressing on the United Nations for at least 5 African countries to be members of the UN Security Council. African Union has not done that. How do you explain that we have engineers, that is, civil engineers in Africa, medical doctors in Africa? Let me take civil engineers, and they are constructing African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa. It is done by Chinese. Does it sound normal to these are people who are in the West, be it Africans who live in the West? Does it sound normal that a country that is what we call in the local parlance Ngumba house, you call a foreigner to come and build that house for you when you have those engineers? How do we explain that multi-billion road contracts on the African continent are not manned by African engineers, but by foreign engineers with their foreign companies? These things have been carefully cooked up. That is why Africans who listen to us now, when they hear an African in Europe telling you, let us support these leaders, you know, number counts. You start asking yourself, which kind of leader am I supporting? Leaders that have worked for the misery of Africans through their dictatorship and their gullible attitude. Leaders who have investments. As I talk, Luis, we are a journalist. I do investigation. Find out these leaders, we are praising them. Find out their investments. How many and how much investment do they have back in Africa? Let me not say in their countries. Let me say back in Africa. Assuming that you are a president in Senegal, and maybe you don't have investment in Senegal, you have in South Africa. All is Africa. or you are a minister in let's call it Ethiopia, and you have an investment, say in Egypt. How many of them? Almost all of them, their accounts are swelling every day in the Swiss banks. All of them, they have modern edifices that are in France, Canada, and Europe. So we support local leaders. We call them political vampires.
Well, I think we're going to get back to Mr. Fives just shortly. I think we have connection issues with him. And now let's welcome Kikilomo Shodeko. You are risk and security expert. Kikilomo, it's a pleasure having you on the program this afternoon. Let's go straight away. We're discussing on the fact that Africa is resource rich, but yet poverty stricken. And many believe that this poverty on the African continent is rooted in colonial legacies. However, we have new global players who are reshaping, according to others, who are reshaping geopolitics on the African continent. Do you see this the presence of these new global players as actually genuine, or do you think it's just neo-colonialism in disguise? What's your take on the presence of what we believe are new players on the African continent? Kikilomo Shodeko, welcome.
Yeah, hi. I hope you can hear me clearly. These guys are not new players per se, from my perspective. What they are people taking advantage of the shift in the global order, right? But sadly, Africa is not taking advantage of that shift, and we did not. A shift happened. And Africa, we are not taking advantage of it. And the reason we are not taking advantage of this shift is because we do not have leaders that are visionaries. We do not have elites that are interested in the general growth of Africa. At the end of the day, everybody wants to take advantage of Africa. And I think that's where the problem is from the start. And so because of that, as much as we want these other players to have Africa on their minds, they really don't. They have their countries on their mind, and we can see how they're going about it already. We see how China is fighting back on any kind of tariffs that is put against them. We see how Russia is also fighting on their hand. So everybody is fighting for their, for their country, for their own glory, while we in Africa are still waiting for other people to come and rescue us, right? So I don't think it matters if they are coming into Africa and they are maybe quote unquote the new world order, as the case may be. They do not have our best interest at heart, and they never will. I'm sorry to break our hearts, but that's the reality. We ourselves have to have Africa on our minds and have Africa as the center of our thought process so that we can actually move the continent forward. Till then, these conversations do not really matter in that sense, because we cannot expect someone, Elvis just said it, you can't expect someone to come and build your house for you. You will start building, and when you start building, you will now, if they see that you're building, they might come in to help. But even that help, you have to be careful, because at the end of the day, they still get to go home while you continue to build. So it's very important that we know, that difference in the importance of how it is important for us as Africans to recognize that we have to build on our own. We have to do the work, and really, whatever new world order is happening out there shouldn't matter to us. We should be building. We should actually take advantage of the shift and take advantage of these opportunities. But sadly, we do not have leaders, and I would even say followers that are eager for that change to happen, because we are still waiting for some sort of rescue, which I don't know where it's going to come from. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And you highlight the aspect of lack of visionary leaders on the continent. And Mr. Fives had highlighted the fact that, he accepted that past colonialism actually influenced governance on the African continent. And primarily, if we're looking at the fact that colonialism influenced leadership on the African continent, and we're talking about leaders who lack vision. Now, where do we place this aspect, and who do we blame here, and how can we mold these leaders to be able to, have a positive vision for their continent, where we actually know at the back they are equally being influenced by, neo-colonial aspects and our tendencies and all the rest.
Yeah, Luis, colonization is the elephant in the room. We cannot overstate the problems, that colonization has caused in Africa. I want to give you a small example. We were discussing the other day, for example, in my village meeting, for example, where I'm from Gutsi, right? In those days, we really didn't have a chief per se. We had, we had tribal leaders, and we really didn't have a chief. And so when the Germans came, hey, who is your chief? Who is your leader? And then they imposed a chief. Until today, how many years after, we still have chieftaincy disputes and all of that, because it's contrary to who we are as a people. So in my group, we are trying to look into resolving some of that, but these are problems that stem from colonization, because most of the people in the Southwest, we really did not have chiefs per se. We were people where we had leaders. We had leaders and we had a council of leaders. We really didn't have chiefs. But it was convenient to the West when they come to deal with the group to say, who is your chief? Who is your chief? And then where does, this, and so we're dealing with that till date. But my brother Eddie did say that there's no need to reinvent anything. You have countries like America that have been efficient in decolonizing, in decolonization. Africa needs to do the same. My brother Eddie talked about the United States. Why has the United States been able to decolonize? First, the almighty dollar. The almighty dollar, which is the world currency. He who pays the piper calls the tune. Everybody uses the dollar. But you see, in most African countries, they have prevented African countries from having their own currency. We don't have a currency. We use foreign currency. So we are not independent, Luis. That answers your question. Most of our problems stems from the fact that we are not independent. If you don't have your monetary policy, other people have to determine. You have BEAC. BEAC, we still have a French person on the BEAC to veto our stuff and to spy on our monetary policies. We're not independent, fiscally. We don't have fiscal independence. So some of them looking to. You have the American military. They're going to decolonize. Who's going to come and talk to them? They're going to bomb you. We have Hiroshima. We have Nagasaki. They have the military. So those are the things that if Africa really wants independence, Africa wants to be a leader. My brother, Professor Fai, talked about Africa doesn't have a permanent seat at the U.S. Security Council. Those are some of the things. If they really want to be taken seriously by the West, again, we need to find balance because, at Africa, we also have our philosophy, our culture, so what kind of military do we want to take? You also have, so those are some of the things that we need to look into. Yes, coming to African Union. African Union, again, who pays the piper calls the tune. African Union is funded by the European Union and other Western bodies. So they are there to do the bidding of the West. African Union is not really a body that caters to African issues. We know that. So either we rework African Union, or we get rid of it and create a new body altogether. But that new body will have to be funded by Africa. Now, if this book that I always refer to, you have it's in French. It is it's called Introduction à la question africaine by Paul Bekima. Which I think Paul Bekima is one of the greatest economists in Africa right now. He talked about, I don't want to, so I'm giving that's where it's coming from. Introduction à la question africaine. It talks about African countries funding the African Union by using some of our natural resources. So when these Western people come to negotiate of our natural resources, our cocoa, our gold, our bauxite, our iron, some of it, a percentage from each negotiation should be put into funding the African Union or whatever body that we get. That way, it's fully independent of the West. Because if the West continues to fund the African Union, they are going to do the bidding of the West. That's why stuff is happening. African Union doesn't say anything. African Union determines who is going to head the African Union. We had ambassador, the lady, the African Union ambassador here in the United States, Ambassador Kwe. The France decided that she should be removed because France decides who is going to lead agency. The West decides because Ambassador Kwe and to these people who talked about Ambassador Chombobori Kwe, she is an elder. People who say that elders in Africa don't have a role. She's an elder, and a lot of these people, so-called dictators, and that I'm going to come to that dictator. Who is a dictator? Who determines who is a dictator? What are the characteristics of a dictator? You know, these people, in order to disenfranchise our leaders, they come up with all these terms. Dictator, junta, you know, who's to determine? What's the criteria of a dictator? And tell me who is a dictator. Let me show you in the West, people that meet those criteria, that are being worshipped by their countries. But when they come to Africa, oh, they are dictators. And we buy into that. We buy into that, which is all part of gimmicks, of the geopolitical gimmicks to disenfranchise our leaders. So, again, so definitely African Union needs to be reformed. We need to reform the African Union if we are serious. We need to fund it, basically. He who pays the piper calls the tune. We need to fund the African Union. And Paul Bekima, in his book Introduction à la question africaine, is suggesting that whenever we sell our natural resources, a percentage should be sent to fund the African Union. My brother Elvis talked about Chinese building the African Union building. Of course, this is what was negotiated. Chinese fund the building. He pays the piper calls the tune. When they went to fund the building, in the agreement, they said the building must be built by a Chinese company. If you want the money, you have to agree that these are some of the terms we are talking about. This is your topic, Luis. You're talking about new players. New players. They're giving the money to build the building, and this is in the contract that the building needs to be built by the Chinese. If we had money, this is what we're talking about, selling, coming together as a block to negotiate, because you need to come to negotiate from a position of strength. Like my sister said, who is going to help us? We are who we are. I have breaking news. Nobody is going to come and help Africa. Africans have to help Africa. We are who we are waiting for. While we are waiting for whoever to come, whether it's God or Jesus or Buddha or whoever to come and save us, in the meantime, you have us, you, me. We are going to save ourselves. We cannot wait on anybody, because these so-called new players that come, they are business people. They're coming to invest. As an investment, you need return on investment. They're coming to make money. They have liquidity and they're here to make money. So if you come to Africa, it's not charity. They're business people. They're ruthless business people. They come into Africa, they're coming to negotiate from a position of strength, and they're coming to make money from Africa. So you guys, we need to get our act together. The last time I was in Cameroon, I always go to there's a APME. There's APME in Yaoundé, which is an organization, is a government agency to support businesses. And when I went in there with my business idea, they were very happy, very happy to see me. They encouraged me. They said, "We just had Germans in your seat a couple of days ago." They said they're so happy when they see Africans come in to also negotiate business, because they always have the Westerners always there to negotiate. Westerners have their together. They're very aggressive into business. But Africans are the ones who are laid back. So we need to get our act together. And Louise, you talked about poor, and I want to say, what do you define as poverty? Somebody talked about the GDP of Cameroon being 500 francs. I said that is a lie from the pit of hell. There is no Cameroonian. I challenge anybody on this platform. There's no Cameroonian who eats 500 francs a day. These are statistics that cannot even be backed up. Again, I'm referring to this book, Introduction à la question africaine. We need African economists, African statisticians to come up with true data. There's nobody in Cameroon who eats $500 a day, because when they use what they use to call their statistics, their samples are not representative. Because we have a lot of things like our Njangis and other things that are not in the mainstream economy and that cannot be tracked. So, and then, they cannot be tracked. So, those are false data. We can't go by them. Personally, I'm not worried about the debt, Africa's debt. As my brother Elvis said, in a very short span of time, Burkina Faso has been able to pay off his debts and is doing very well economically. That means that any African nation with the right policy can do that. It brings me to my next point. We talk about young leaders. Young leaders are good, but I maintain the fact that as an African, we have nothing with old people. We respect old people. Old people are wisdom. All these young leaders, the young leaders from Burkina Faso, the young leaders from Senegal, they are going to become old tomorrow. So what, are we going to discard them when they become old? I don't think that age is a factor. The fact, what we're talking about is good leadership. You have John Mahama of Ghana, who was just voted back as president. He used to be president some time ago. He was just voted into Ghana, which my brother Fai is using as a very good example. John Mahama is almost 70 years old. He's almost 70 years old, but he's doing a great job in Ghana. So I don't think that age is an issue. I think that the issue, if you look at the United States seat of power, the Congress and the Senate, majority of those people are old, over 60 years old. Some have been in Congress for over 50 years. You have Nancy Pelosi. You have the guy from West Virginia who was 90-something. He's been in power for over 60 years. So I don't think that age is an issue. What we need is good governance. We need good governance. We need leaders with good policies. And Luis, to your point, yes, we're still suffering from neo-colonialism. We are not fully independent. We don't have fiscal independence. I was speaking to one of my colleagues here. I was telling him an American, I said, no, my country, we don't have a central bank. He couldn't believe me. He thought I was lying. I said, no, we don't. He said, you're not a country. I said, no, we're not. Really? So we're actually doing well under the circumstances. We don't have a central bank. We can't come up with a fiscal policy. We are still colonized fiscally. But there is we're definitely who we want, under the circumstances we have. I say that based on your topic, the new players, it gives us a new opportunity to strategize, to negotiate, wisely. And we should look from what we have learned from over the years. We should learn from that and negotiate better. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Madam Marilyn Dua. We got your point clearly. And the fact that Africa is not independent is, of course, that echoes out very clearly. And Dr. Eddie Eric, Africa is not independent. We are not independent, but we have these global players stationed at our doorsteps, and they are ready to help, and they're always there. And they've come in with so much investments that we cannot ignore, because that is what actually the continent needs. How do we deny these investments that they are bringing in, considering the fact that we want to be independent, we want to do it by ourselves, because we know that at the end of the day, they don't have the best interest. They cannot do it better than if we were supposed to do it. But then we need their investments. How can we, go about this?
Does the desire of being independent eliminate the importance, the relevance, and the necessity of cooperation? I believe the answer to that question is no. It is no, because when we look at the rest of the world and things that are being done today, and of course also naturally, There are things that country A possesses that country B does not have, that country B needs for its own upkeeping. Therefore comes the idea of cooperation. We are living in the world today. The North Atlantic, organization, right? We are looking at the organization of for cooperation and development. We are looking at different trade bodies or trade economic, zones between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. It is not because Canada does not is an underdeveloped country or does not have its own path towards maintaining itself, but cooperation is what human beings do. And that dates back to the ages and ages and ages, and it had perpetuates, into the modern world that we live in today. Earlier, to give another example and answer the question, will be Sheikh Anta Diop. And I'm glad that, we have a new economist, as my sister, became just brought up and then named one of our economists, we're talking about what can be done in charting the path. When it comes to the French CFA, how many of those African, economists, may it be Nabucco, may it be this Ivorian guy in France, whose name I forget. All of those individuals are talking about the important. And the reason why many of the African countries still operating different CFA can sever ties with this currency, create their own, and chart their own ways. Nigeria remains the giants, the big country, regardless of the economic and the inflation that the country is dealing with today. Nigeria has its own currency. So the first answer to the question is we should not automatically equate the desire of independence, of growth, and economic development for Africa, right, to completely removing ourselves from any cooperation, any friendship with other countries. That's not the issue. The question is, how does Africa lean on, leverage its own resources? And what are those resources? Number one, we are looking at the population. It is again very beautiful to hear, and it has become, a rhetoric, and we don't want it to remain just a rhetorical statement. When we hear people saying that, in a few years from now, in the span of 10 years, Africa will concentrate, by itself, a significant portion of the working force, because our population in Africa is a young population. That's what is being is needed. Yes, that is a great thing, ladies and gentlemen. But we need to change that into an asset, not for that to become a liability, because it will become a liability if our young people continue to migrate to the world, to Saudi Arabia, to the Middle Eastern countries, or to Europe or to North America, looking for better pastures. How do we harness that potential, we're back in the country, of course, by the creation of jobs? First solution. Second thing, how do we make sure that those investments that are coming in, right, are actually being used for Africa? What do we notice right now? It is this kleptocracy. How are these deals? How are these concessions made? Where is the transparency in that? What is the say that people have? And when I say people, I mean men and women, citizens in the countries, workers. What is their say in the contracts that we have? To what extent the people in Liberia say something when the Senate in that country agreed that, a company from Saudi Arabia should have more than 1 million hectares of forest for the carbon deal? That's one example. When we are hearing about the discovery of natural oil, natural gas, in the Gulf of Guinea, between Cote d'Ivoire and all the way down to Cameroon, and then we hear about, either Italian, US, or British companies that come in there to explore first and then exploit. What is the contract? In Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, it is 15% for the entire country of Cote d'Ivoire versus the rest for the company that is exploiting. Where does that go? Who owns the small and mid-sized businesses in our countries? Are they in local hands or are they in foreign hands? If they are in foreign hands, that it means that we are also signing some deals that allow people to repatriate, right, the surplus that they are making instead of reinvesting in the countries. Then we talk, about corruption. Yes, those are systems that come from our partners, maybe from the United States, maybe for the European Union or European countries, even nowadays from Turkey, or from now the Islamic Bank of Development. This is the new thing that we are discovering more and more in Africa. How much of these funds that are coming in truly go toward what they were meant to go for? One thing I agree on: the private sector. I do not believe that the private sector, as much as we can liberalize, as much as we can privatize, I do not believe that, the private sector is the number one engine of development. No. For our African countries, I think we need to go back to the ABC, the states, the public sector. The government has to be the number one engine in driving the development of those countries. That's the reason why, and this is the other solution, how do we go about that, is to make sure, by all means necessary, that we put in place leaders that are patriotic, leaders that have, number one, the interests of the countries of Africa in their hands, leaders that are clearly Afro or African centered. It's the beginning of it. And again, I agree, that doesn't have anything to do with age. Because I remember years ago, when Macron was elected the president of France, it became a template for so many pundits. Oh, look at that. France has elected, was somebody who is so young. Look at what Macron has done for the country. He has completely messed up that country. And I agree with my brother Elvis earlier when he mentioned the case of Togo. When the young Yassingbe took over, we have some people who also believe that, he's not going to do like his father. We are talking about 2005. We are in 2025. 20 years after, he still remains in power. So it has nothing to do with age. It has something to do with the vision, with patriotism, with the mechanism that we put in place so that we can harness all these investments that are coming in. Today, Africa is the new battlefield for critical minerals. Here's another opportunity again to develop infrastructures. And some countries are doing that. China is building, the Belt and Road Initiative. Then we talk about, the Lobito Corridor. We have other construction that going on in there. But Louis, how much of those money that comes in there for construction is actually going toward that? Give you an example, and I rest on that. In Côte d'Ivoire, the country where I'm from, it is said that, the government currently wants to build a rail system or an urban train system, in Abidjan. Years ago, before this government came into place, when this thing was budgeted, it was at around $10 billion. Guess what? Since this government is in place, the price of that same urban train system has been multiplied by how many? 10. Today, we are talking about $100 billion. There's something in there that is not working. Why is that, we are building all these huge and humongous stadiums for soccer competition that actually does not bring anything back to us? I'm not saying that we should not we should not be building good stadiums for our professional soccer. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, why those billions of dollars in there in countries where people still need to have access to basic healthcare? When we know that in 2001, the African countries decided what we call the Abuja Declaration, that countries should be investing, actually, 1% or, 15% of their, forget me about the percentage, of their annual resources in developing the healthcare system. How many of those countries have done that? We have done so poorly that even when the COVID, the coronavirus, pandemic hits, people even have the nerve to steal money that came from in there. So, with all these examples, Louis, and I'm resting on that and giving the floor back, how do we harness that? Number one, again, it is not about rejecting cooperation. That's not the case. Even countries that are developed today cooperate among themselves. Europe cooperates with Africa, with America. America cooperates with Canada, with making sure that African values are African values. We should not be accepting any nonsense. And you see where I'm going with this question. And I want to yield back to you, Luis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eric Ezi. We got to clearly. Now, you highlight on the fact that we should not reject this cooperation or partnerships. And Madam Mirilini will be focusing on, we look at these partnerships and these investments from these global players. Do you think it's been able to translate into tangible benefits on the African continent? You had earlier mentioned the fact that Africa should form blocks. We should have been able to speak in one voice, which that, of course, is what Africa lacks at the moment, not being able to speak in one voice to give it that bargaining power. Now, looking at these partnerships and these investments from these global players, has it been able to change something tangible or translate to a tangible, benefits on the African continent?
Yes, I want to say yes, to a little bit extent, not as much as it could have. But I just want to say something on this platform today, Luis. I want to give credit where credit is going to, where credit needs to go to. I want to give credit to our forefathers, because there is an ideology that is floating out there about an Africa without Africans. And if you want to look at other countries like America, where we had the Native Americans that were here, right now they live in reservations. They've been put in reservations where they live. If you look at Australia, you had the indigenous people of Australia. They also, Canada, they're reservations. Our forefathers fought very hardly, because some, who would say that maybe that's not what was intended for Africa, for us to also be in reservations while other people, are in our land. You have South Africa, you have also. I want to really just, have appreciation and gratitude, because we tend to always, want to beat down on, our forefathers. Well, they did what they could with what they had, and they fought hard. To have Africa still be by Africans and still have, African leaders, although most of them are colonial leaders that were put into place by the colonies. But, who knows? We could have been in reservation, and some, there's still the idea flowing out there that Africa without Africans. So I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate our forefathers who fought bloody civil war revolutions to make sure that we still have countries, although colonized, but we still have countries. I just wanted to put that out there. I definitely agree with my brother, Dr. D, who says we are not islands, right? We're going to have to partner with others. You have those who think that Africa should close its borders. Africa is probably one of the only continents that can close its borders and survive. But again, throughout Africans, we've always, had commerce with other countries. So these people are going to come. People are always going to come for us to negotiate. It's very important. It's sad about what Dr. Edip talked about in Cote d'Ivoire, that you have a project that is now 10 times more expensive. And this is why, Luis, have always been calling, especially those who claim to be federalists. Elections is not just about the presidency. The parliamentary municipal elections are so important, because if you have a vibrant parliament that will hold those people accountable, I can't think of any corporation that is run like that you have a budget, you have experts that come up with a budget for a project, and then down the road, it's 10 times more expensive. Inefficiency, which is what plagues, Luis, again, Dr. Edith talked about it. It's not only about these partnerships that we sign, but how are they carried about? A lot of companies in Africa are mismanaged. I want to talk about Cameroon, where I'm from, and my region where I am from, the Southwest region. We have so many companies, PAMO, CDC. We had Sonara. There's no reason why there's unemployment. There should be transparency. So they've signed this partnership, Luis. To your question, is it going to make an impact? There should be transparency. in all of this negotiation, any backdoor deals and any, there should be transparency on this partnership. We want to see them posted so we can go through them. We want that there should be accountability. Accountability. In Cameroon, for example, they talked about funding that is available for reconstruction. I want to see accountability. How many years after? What has been built? What is still to be built? How much was used? We need to Africa, because again, we, like Dr. Edi said, we have our culture where we tend to respect people. The African mentality is that leaders are responsible and take care of their people. But trust but verify. I'm not saying that we don't trust. Trust but verify. Transparency, accountability. Dr. Edi also talked about something very important, that these negotiations, who are those that are going to benefit from it? Are we, is it are we going to, the locals, are they going to partner? Or are we going to have foreign people again coming in? You have other countries where the economy is held by maybe Lebanese or Indians or whoever has the local economy. You have countries where they will tell you that people from this country should abstain. You have neighborhoods where they will tell you no African should apply in Africa. So how are the governments making sure that they are making sure that the locals, there's transfer of technology, there's transfer of wealth to the local businesses? I agree with you, Dr. Edi. The government has a major role. It cannot just be private partnership, but the private companies also have a role to play. And if the government has to make conditions available, like I'm so happy to see recently, I saw this week coming from Cameroon where the government issued a statement that people can now have licenses for import export. I saw that. Those are the kind of things that we want to see. The government has to make that the environment is accessible for people to open businesses and trade. So we want to make sure that, again, like you said, we need accountability, we need transparency. Very, very important. Luis, you talked about Africa is still poor. Only for you to define poor. What is poor? Is it buildings? Is it is it infrastructure? Is it? But again, we have the basic. I'm totally okay. And if we had a powerful African Union, we should not be building stadiums for entertainment where we don't have basic necessities of water, electricity, we don't have basic infrastructure. It's things that you can't see them in some of those Muslim countries, and that it should be unacceptable. As African Union, as a bloc, we should refuse to fit on some of these people. But you cannot build these stadiums if the country doesn't have a certain level of development, basic infrastructure. You can't have these tables because people want to come and have entertainment. Child mortality is this, infant mortality, maternal mortality. There's basic infrastructure we don't have. So again, this is why it's important for governance. We need good infrastructure. We need good governance in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Marilyn. And well, we got you clearly. And just to remind those of you watching us, you can take some time out to share with us what you think. Maybe leave us a comment on the Facebook Live, or probably call us. The numbers will be on your screen. You can call us directly and share with us your thoughts with regards to global players and their partnerships, of course, on the African continent. Do you think this this new form of partnership is a form of disguise, or do you think it's actually very genuine? Now, we talked briefly on the fact that 42 leaders from 42 countries are meeting for the first time in South Africa for the G20 summit, and most especially the theme this year, the summit, of course, has a theme which has to do with Africa's development priorities, global economic reforms, climate change, fair trade, and financial support for development. Now, it's the first time that this summit is holding on the African soil in South Africa. However, President Trump, out of protest, has refused to attend the summit. We'll talk with you, Dr. Edi Eric. What's your take on this G20 summit holding on the African soil, and do you think this summit has any potential to change a narrative on the African soil with regards to Africa being one of the priorities on the theme for this year's summit?
We said it earlier. I mentioned that earlier. There is a new rush that we have seen lately in terms of emerging new interest for minerals that are deemed and materials that are deemed very important and critical for the future of a world economy, for invention, for our safety, and anything that what you may have mentioned. The fact that what the summit is taking place in Africa for me is what I said earlier is the reason why we have this new dimension, right? As we talked about, geopolitics, which is a word that we often use and use and use, and I hope that we do not fall into an overuse of the term to the point that it loses its significance. Geopolitics is about language. Geopolitics is about what some of the strategic what actions that are laid out to, of course, underline the interest, the importance and relevance of some of those partners, right, that remain, of course, what very critical in this global stage. When we talk about global powers, it is true that as a continent, Africa at this point still today does not hold the handles, right, of its own development, and then have a say, in some. But let us not forget that, in that geopolitical world, and global geopolitical world that, what we are talking about, African diplomacy exists. African diplomacy is there. Let us not forget that, when the African free continental free trade agreement, what becomes goes into full swing, it will become what the largest, right, common market in the world. This is something very important, very critical also to take into consideration. Another thing to take into consideration also is the emergence of this new leadership in Africa. When we talk about the leaders, we talked about the impact of colonialism in our systems of governance in Africa. Let us not forget that, the reaction that, what we see today, or the emerging new literature or scholarship regarding how Africa should be run otherwise, how, what governance should be run otherwise. Some people even go that far to suggest that, hey, listen, maybe we need to come back to the roots and see how our African societies were managed, before, so that, we draw some of those lessons and trying to modernize the things so that we move forward. All of those things are also what? Remnants of colonialism. That's what we call post-colonialism in terms of reacting or designing a new path that actually contradicts what we have been doing maybe for the past 100 years, right? So the summit is taking place in Africa. It highlights the importance of South Africa as a global player, an important player for African diplomacy. We should not deny that. Years ago, South Africa, I believe Egypt and Nigeria were part of the African countries that were suggested to have a seat, at the United Nations Security Council to give Africa a voice in there. I think that this is has been off the table for some times. We need to revamp that, and I believe that that's where South Africa, as an influential country in Africa, has been in there. Personally, I am seeing this also as a logical development of what South Africa has represented for Africa since 1994. Right after the end, quote unquote, of apartheid, at least politically, and the fact that South Africa moved ahead to organize the first ever general open election that saw the arrival of Nelson Mandela. Luis, I don't know where you were at that time, but for some of us who were in high school, right, at that moment, listen, everywhere in Africa, the ANC Black National Anthem became the song. After 1994, you can count the number of foreigners from West Africa, especially from Nigeria, if I wanted to include that's migrated to South Africa. It became the hub, you understand, until today. When you look at the military apparatus for South Africa, it is very bad. And I'm going to say it, that South Africa abandoned its nuclear program after 1994. But let me tell you that, what, this country is what it is. So today, the G20 in that country in there is, I think, we're putting South Africa on that stage. Remember one thing. Not long ago, South Africa boldly went ahead to the International Court of Justice, actually to the International Criminal Court, not the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, to actually put the pressure regarding what is happening in the Middle East today. This is a very important question, and this is a bold step that, what this country took in terms of its leadership. I don't know any other African country that would have done that. I'm not sure that, South Africa wants to completely sever its tie with Israel or with any other country, but it's a global a conflict that is impacting, global relations, and South Africa took this stage. So for me, I put all of those things together. South Africa as a regional hegemon, as an African hegemon, as a economic power for Africa, as the country that's actually the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, if it's from South Africa. I put all these things together and I say, well, it is good that they're in there. You mentioned the fact that, the U.S. is not going to be present. I'm not going to comment on that, but regardless, the United States remains a big player when it comes to the G20. There is no debate regarding that. And Luis, as I end on that question to yield back to you, I want to make this thing clear that I've noted throughout, with the conversation today, in some of the comments that some of our, co-panelists who are not, who probably have to leave, made. It is not a matter of the African diaspora who live abroad. We have abroad in the U.S., in France, everywhere in the world you have an African diaspora. You have a true patriotic Africans, whether they're from Cameroon, from Cote d'Ivoire, from Mali, from Nigeria, wherever they are, who love their country, who have the best interests of the country at heart, who, wherever they are, even when they naturalize in the country of adoption, whether it is in England or Canada or in the United States or in wherever country in Europe, continue to invest in their country. And that investment is not just in terms of the money or the money transfer that they send to their country, but it's also in terms of ideas. And some of them even use their position in countries where they are to actually try to influence, right, the foreign policy of their country of adoption when it comes to. Not long ago, this past Thursday, I was at the U.S. House of Representatives for a hearing on how the Nigeria was designated as a country of a particular concern by the United States. I have seen a number of Nigerian people going in there to hear what it is and if it is possible, those who testify or did not testify, but it was this interesting in there. So let's be careful sometimes how we label people because they live in the West when they talk about we need to support our leaders. African unity, no matter what it is, will remain key. And what do we say that? Do I say that? Look at even the countries of the Sahel. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Decided that, they don't want to be part of the ECOWAS anymore. What did they do? They moved quickly to unite. And they created this association of the countries of the Sahel. Unity is key. It will be important for us to move in that direction, whether we like it or not. What we are addressing and underlining is the fact that currently there are so many African leaders who do not have the best interest of the continent, the best interest of the country, of their countries, the best interest of their people who elect them at their hearts. The one in Cote d'Ivoire, where I'm from, cannot be traveling every 2 months or every 3 months, so frequently to France all the time. What is the interest in there? It means what it means. That's what we are denouncing, but not the other way around. So we got to be very careful in the scholarship that, we'll bring in here, as we talked about, what all these possibilities and ideas for Africa's, capacity to harness its own natural resources, but also its a relationship with those other global powers as we are seeking. I was on one of those shows, and I think it was with YouTube Media, for humility, I'm sorry. And then one of the panelists said something that I told him that I will borrow and that will stick with me everywhere. He said, we didn't come on earth to suffer. We came on earth to enjoy and to contribute to the enjoyment of others. So it is not written anywhere that African people should be suffering. It is not written anywhere that, because you are a peasant in Africa, you should not be able to take care of yourself if you are sick, or you should not be able to feed for your family. It is written nowhere that because you are a cocoa farmer, that you should be harvesting nothing from your hard work, while some multinational corporations and even people who do not grow a small beans of a cocoa can reap the benefit of what you are sowing. It is impossible. It is impossible. And I want to end on that one. And I'm speaking and saying that, with all the rage that you can imagine, just of not just the passion, but the desire and the optimism that we have that, it has been too long. 60 years is enough. And all the plans that are in place that should be duly implemented. We should fight corruption. We should fight kleptocracy. We should fight, undesirable leaders, and making sure that all the resources that come to Africa are really oriented duly toward what needs to be the basis for people to grow and develop.
Thank you, Dr. Eric A.D. That was clear enough. We got you so keenly. And I'm going to end with you, Madam Marilyn Doa. Just your comments on the G20 summit holding in South Africa, which has one of its key terms, development agenda, on the African development priorities on its agenda. What is your comments on that summit holding in Africa for the first time? Do you think it's African can take advantage of that? And what do you think about one of his agendas, which has to do with development priorities on the continent?
Louise, again, I just want to thank you for inviting me, and thank you to all the panelists for such wonderful and insightful conversations. About the G20, it's South Africa holds the presidency right now. It's a rotating presidency, and South Africa has that presidency. So it makes sense that they're holding the meeting in South Africa, in Johannesburg. I don't think there's any impact really in Africa. I don't see. It's great that it's in South Africa. I don't see. South Africa is a member, but on the continent, I really don't see any impact. South Africa hosted the World Cup. Again, it was the first country. I don't see how that impacted the World Cup in any way. I'm predicting the same for this. I see some of what they're going to discuss, climate change. Climate change in Africa, we contribute very little to the problems of climate change, and we suffer quite a bit from it. I don't see any impact on that. President Trump did not attend the meeting because President Trump doesn't really consider all of these international organizations as really having any impact. It's the 20 richest countries going in there to negotiate. And honestly, like my sister left Kikolomo, before she left, she said, we have to solve our own problems. Yes, we have to interact with other people, but ultimately, we are going to solve our own problem. We are the richest continent. We have the youngest people. I keep saying that even more than Africa's riches, one of our most important assets are Africa's people. When I look at Dr. Edi, I look at Africans, people in the diaspora, at home, we are the greatest asset. What we need is for these governments to work with us, good governance, provide the platforms and the avenues we have, to bring about change, to bring about development. No one is going to help us except ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. No one is going to help us except ourselves. Dr. Eddie Eric, we want to appreciate you very much for your time. Thank you for being part of the program this afternoon, Dr. Eddie Eric.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm not saying much. I'm glad to be on this show. I am on the school of African scholars and thinkers who are on the optimistic, very optimistic, also for on the optimistic side of things. I believe that it is doable, especially when we see in our leadership, and here when I say leadership, not just those who are elected, but when we see in our young people technology, the digital, capabilities, all that we are seeing, I continue to believe that, one day we will click it, and then we'll see an overall leadership in our countries that will definitely move or pose the actions that needs to be posed, so that we can start seeing African people from the rural area to the urban centers, from the peasants to people working in whatever sector of the economy, really reaping the basic of social protection that we need, because that's the beginning of development, that's the beginning of growth. When people do not have access to electricity, when people don't have access to potable water, when people do not have access to healthcare, we cannot talk about what development is in there. All of those things. Today, there are sectors that are growing more and more where people can actually create a job. Our agricultural sector is plunging instead of being the basis of our economy. Nigeria, because of oil, have stopped being a rice producer, rice exporter, or harvest the benefit of its yam and what you call it, cassava. For instance, we'll continue to import rice. So there are so many things that we want to see happening, and I am very optimistic that those things can happen with the new leadership that we see mounting more and more. It is true. There are so many obstacles to all of those things, and those obstacles sometimes come from the vestiges of colonialism, with the fact that we have not internally also reinvented ourselves so well to counter all of these new global powers that are coming in. Some of them even not from a colonial perspective, but from a vantage point that is actually not in favor of or to the detriment of Africa. All the deals that are being signed today, even when you look at the China's partnership with Africa, are not necessarily in favor of Africa. When we talk about the environment being depleted, the environment being polluted, or the environment being degraded today in Africa, it is not just the French company that does that. It is also the new partners that we have that are also contributing to all of those things. So there's a lot to do, but I remain very optimistic, and I want to thank you for this opportunity. And thank you, Sister Ndoa. Nice meeting you, and I hope we can meet on other instances of this show.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you very much, Madame Marilyn Ndoa, host of the Zoom In show on AfroSat TV. Thank you very much. The role of new global players in reshaping African geopolitics, new form of neo-colonialism, or genuine political partners. That was our topic of discussion for today. We keep our fingers crossed, just like you heard it from our panelists. We have to solve our problems by ourselves, and we have the key responsibility to build the continent that, of course, we want. Thank you very much, those of you who were watching, and a big thank you to our guests who helped us in discussing this topic. Thank you for always tuning into Afrique Media. Thank you to our technicians as well. We invite you to stay glued to more programs on Afrique Media, your Pan-African television. Bye-bye.